The church bells rang hollow in the dusty New Mexico air, their echo bouncing off the adobe walls of Cimarron's only chapel, and Wilhelmina Tucker stood at the altar in her mother's wedding dress, watching her intended groom turn pale as milk before spinning on his polished boots and striding straight out the door without a single word of explanation. The congregation erupted in gasps and murmurs, 200 witnesses to her public humiliation on what should have been the happiest day of her life. She stood frozen, the lace veil trembling against her face, her bouquet of desert wildflowers suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds in her shaking hands. "I am so sorry," Wilhelmina whispered to the crowd, her voice barely carrying past the first row of pews. Her father, Thomas Tucker, reached for her elbow, his weathered face twisted in an expression somewhere between rage and sorrow. Her mother had passed 3 years prior, and Wilhelmina knew she would have known exactly what to say in this moment, how to salvage some dignity from this catastrophe. "That yellow-bellied coward," her father muttered under his breath. "I will kill him." "Papa, please," Wilhelmina said softly, though her own heart was shattering into pieces behind her carefully maintained composure. She had known Marcus Downey for 8 months, had agreed to marry him because he seemed steady and reliable, because at 23 years old she was tired of being alone on their small ranch outside of town. He had never made her heart race, never made her laugh until her sides ached, but she had convinced herself that security and partnership mattered more than passion. Now she wondered what he had seen when he looked at her standing there at the altar. What had been so terrible that he could not even manage to speak a word before fleeing? The weight of every pitying gaze in that church pressed down on her shoulders until she thought she might collapse. "Everyone, please," the Reverend said, raising his hands. "Let us give the Tucker family some privacy." The guests began filing out, whispering behind gloved hands and fans. Wilhelmina caught fragments of their speculation. "Must have been another woman. I heard his family was bankrupt. Poor girl, who will have her now?" That last comment struck her like a physical blow. She gathered her skirts and walked down the aisle with as much grace as she could muster, her father at her side. Outside, the June sun blazed mercilessly, and she blinked against the brightness. A small group of men stood clustered near the hitching posts, their voices raised in argument. "Someone ought to ride after him," one man said. "Let him go," another replied. "Man does not want to get married, that is his right." Wilhelmina wanted to sink into the earth and disappear. She moved toward her father's wagon, desperate to escape the scene, when she heard a voice cut through the chatter like a knife through butter. "That is no excuse for disrespecting a lady in front of the whole town." She turned to see a tall cowboy standing apart from the others, his dusty hat in his hands. He had sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of strong coffee, and he was looking directly at her with an expression of genuine concern rather than pity. She had never seen him before, which was unusual in a town the size of Cimarron. "You are right about that," her father said, approaching the stranger, "though I do not believe we have met." "Xander Frost," the cowboy said, extending his hand. "I just rode in this morning from Colorado. Was planning to water my horse and move on, but I saw the crowd at the church and got curious." He turned his attention back to Wilhelmina, and she felt something strange flutter in her chest. "Madam, I know it does not mean much coming from a stranger, but any man who would walk away from you is a fool." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "Thank you," she managed. "That is kind of you to say." Her father studied Xander with the assessing gaze of a man who had spent decades reading livestock and people. "You looking for work, Mr. Frost?" "Always open to opportunities," Xander replied. though I will admit I am better with cattle than crops. I could use a hand at my ranch, Thomas said slowly. My foreman quit last month to try his luck at the silver mines, and I have not found a replacement. You interested in honest work for honest pay? Wilhelmina looked at her father in surprise. They had hired day laborers before, but her father was not typically so quick to offer longer-term employment to strangers. Then again, perhaps he simply wanted to get away from the church and all these curious eyes as desperately as she did. Xander glanced between them, then nodded. I appreciate the offer, sir. I will take it. Good, Thomas said. Follow us out to the ranch then. It is about 5 miles south of town. The ride home felt surreal. Wilhelmina sat in the wagon beside her father, still wearing her wedding dress, while Xander Frost followed on a dappled gray horse that looked as road-weary as its rider. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, watching the way the mountains rose up purple and imposing in the distance. The Sangre de Cristo Range had always made her feel small but safe, permanent fixtures in a world that suddenly felt unstable beneath her feet. You do not have to do this, she said quietly to her father. Hire him, I mean. We can manage. We have been barely managing for months, Thomas replied, his voice gruff but not unkind. And something about that young man strikes me as decent. He spoke up when no one else would. Wilhelmina did not respond. She appreciated Xander's words at the church, but she was not sure she could bear being around anyone right now, even a stranger. Her humiliation felt like a physical presence, a heavy cloak she could not shed. When they reached the ranch, Thomas showed Xander to the small bunkhouse near the barn while Wilhelmina fled to her bedroom. She struggled with the tiny buttons running down the back of the wedding dress, until finally, in frustration, she simply tore it off, not caring that she heard the delicate fabric rip. She changed into a simple cotton dress and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Her room was modest but comfortable, filled with small treasures she had collected over the years. A pressed flower from her mother's garden, now dead 5 years. A book of poetry her older brother had sent from back east before he died of pneumonia. A sketch she had made of their ranch when she was 16, all crooked lines and earnest effort. Each object told the story of her life, a life that had suddenly veered in an unexpected direction. She heard voices outside and moved to the window. Her father was walking Xander around the property, pointing out the barn, the small herd of cattle grazing in the near pasture, the chicken coop and root cellar. Even from a distance, she could see how Xander moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in their own skin. He was lean and long-limbed, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Stop it, she told herself. The last thing she needed was to develop some foolish attraction to a drifter who would probably move on in a month. She had just been left at the altar. She should be focused on recovering her dignity, not admiring a strange man's shoulders. But when she came down for supper that evening, having changed into a plain blue dress and pinned her blonde hair into a simple bun, she found herself acutely aware of Xander's presence at their small kitchen table. Her father had invited him to eat with them rather than alone in the bunkhouse, and Wilhelmina had cooked a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork, the kind of hearty fare that working men needed. "This is excellent, Miss Tucker," Xander said after his first bite. "Best meal I have had in weeks." "Trail food gets old fast," Thomas observed. "Where did you say you came from originally?" "Texas," Xander replied. "Near San Antonio. My parents had a small ranch there, but we lost it in a drought about 6 years back. I have been working various spreads since then, moving around, learning the trade." "That is hard country," Thomas said. "Hot as hell in summer." Yes, sir, Xander agreed. New Mexico suits me better. The nights cool down at least. Wilhelmina ate in silence, letting the men talk. She was grateful that Xander did not bring up the wedding or ask prying questions. He seemed content to discuss cattle and weather, and the general state of ranching in the territory. It was only when her father excused himself to check on a pregnant cow in the barn that Xander turned his full attention to her. "I want to apologize if I spoke out of turn earlier," he said quietly. "At the church. I know it was not my place." "You have nothing to apologize for," Wilhelmina replied, meeting his eyes. Up close, they were even more striking, deep brown with flecks of amber. "What you said was kind, more than anyone else offered." "Still," he said, "I am sure today was difficult, and the last thing you probably wanted was attention from strangers." She considered this, then shook her head. "Actually, what I did not want was pity. You did not give me that. You gave me something else." She paused, searching for the right word. "Respect, I suppose." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something more compelling. "That is because I have a sister," he said, "back in Texas, married now with 2 little ones. But I remember when she was courted by this rancher's son who treated her poorly, talked down to her like she was simple. Made me realize that women deal with a lot of nonsense from men who do not value them properly." "Your sister sounds lucky to have a brother like you," Wilhelmina said. "I hope she thinks so," Xander replied. "We do not see each other much anymore with the distance, but I write when I can." They fell into a companionable silence, and Wilhelmina found herself relaxing slightly. There was something steady about Xander, something that made her feel less raw and exposed than she had all day. When her father returned, reporting that the cow was fine and probably still a week away from calving, Xander thanked them both for the meal and headed to the bunkhouse. "He seems decent," Wilhelmina observed as she washed the dishes. "Time will tell," her father replied. "But yes, my gut says he is a good man. We could use that around here." The next morning, Wilhelmina woke before dawn as she always did and began her daily chores. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, and started breakfast while her father tended to the horses. She was surprised when Xander appeared at the kitchen door just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. "Morning," he said. "Your father said to come up for breakfast before we start work." "It will be ready in a few minutes," she told him, flipping hot cakes on the griddle. "Coffee is on the table." He poured himself a cup and sat down, looking around the kitchen with appreciation. It was a simple space, but Wilhelmina kept it clean and organized, with herbs drying from the rafters and her mother's old china displayed on a shelf. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. "All my life," Wilhelmina replied. "My father bought this land in 1867, right after the war. Built this house himself with help from some of the other ranchers. I was born in that bedroom upstairs." "Must be nice," Xander said, "having roots somewhere." She glanced at him curiously. "You do not like moving around," he considered this. "I do and I do not. It is freedom, certainly. No ties, no obligations beyond the current job. But sometimes," he paused, staring into his coffee, "sometimes it feels lonely. Like I am just passing through everyone's life without making a real connection." Wilhelmina understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. Even surrounded by people she had known her entire life, she often felt like an outsider, watching everyone else live their stories while she waited for hers to begin. The engagement to Marcus had felt like a step toward belonging, toward purpose, and now that was gone. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Xander proved to be an excellent worker, skilled with horses and cattle, handy with repairs, and willing to tackle any task without complaint. He fixed the sagging gate on the main corral, helped Thomas mend miles of fence line, and even managed to gentle a young stallion that had been giving them trouble for months. Wilhelmina found herself increasingly aware of his presence. She noticed the way he always removed his hat when speaking to her, the way he never used crude language around her, the way his hands moved with practiced efficiency whether he was mending tack or building a new feeding trough. She caught herself watching him from the kitchen window more often than she should, admiring the play of muscles beneath his worn shirt as he worked in the summer heat. But she was also acutely conscious of how vulnerable she felt. Marcus's rejection had shaken her confidence in her own judgment. What if she was just drawn to Xander because he had been kind to her at her lowest moment? What if this attraction was just her bruised ego seeking validation from the first man who showed her basic decency? She tried to maintain a polite distance, to treat him as just another hired hand, but it was increasingly difficult. Xander had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh at unexpected moments. When a snake appeared in the chicken coop, and she jumped back with a startled yelp, he calmly removed it and relocated it far from the house, then made a gentle joke about how the chickens would be telling that story for generations. When she burned a batch of biscuits because she was distracted, he ate them anyway and declared they were just extra crispy, the way he liked them. One evening in July, about a month after Xander's arrival, Wilhelmina was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard raised voices from the barn. She hurried over to find her father and Xander examining one of their best breeding cows, which was lying on her side in obvious distress. "What happened?" she asked. "Bloat," Xander said grimly. "Bad case. We need to relieve the pressure or we will lose her." Thomas nodded. "I will get the car." Wilhelmina knew enough about ranching to understand the danger. Bloat occurred when a cow's digestive system filled with gas, and if not treated quickly, the animal would suffocate from the internal pressure. The treatment involved puncturing the cow's side to release the gas, a delicate and sometimes risky procedure. She watched as her father and Xander worked together with calm efficiency. Xander held the struggling cow steady, speaking to her in low, soothing tones while Thomas carefully inserted the metal tube. There was a hissing sound as gas escaped, and gradually the cow's frantic movements subsided. "There," Thomas said, relief evident in his voice. "That should do it." They stayed with the cow for another hour, monitoring her recovery. By the time they were satisfied she would survive, full darkness had fallen and Wilhelmina had kept supper warm on the stove. "You have a good hand with animals," Thomas told Xander as they washed up. "Quick thinking, too." "Another half hour and we would have lost her." "Just doing the job," Xander replied, but Wilhelmina could see he was pleased by the praise. Later, as they sat around the table eating, Thomas brought up a subject that had been on Wilhelmina's mind as well. "The town social is coming up in 2 weeks," he said. "They hold it every year in August before the harvest gets fully underway. Dancing, food, that sort of thing." Wilhelmina felt her stomach clench. She had been trying not to think about the social, knowing it would be her first public appearance since the failed wedding. The gossip had died down somewhat, but she knew people would still be watching, whispering, judging. "I am not sure I want to go," she said quietly. "You should," her father replied. "Hold your head high, you have nothing to be ashamed of." "Papa, everyone will be talking about me." "Let them talk," Thomas said firmly. "You did nothing wrong, Wilhelmina. Marcus Downey is the one who should be ashamed wherever he is." Xander had been quiet during this exchange, but now he cleared his throat. "If it would help, Miss Tucker, I would be honored to escort you to the social. That way you would not have to face people alone." Wilhelmina looked at him in surprise. "You do not have to do that." "I know," he said. But I would like to. I have been in Cimarron over a month now and barely know anyone besides you and your father. Seems like a good opportunity to meet the neighbors." She saw the kindness in his offer and felt something warm bloom in her chest. "All right," she said. "Thank you." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Wilhelmina told herself she was not excited about the social, that she was merely determined to face down the gossips and prove she was not broken by what had happened. But she found herself thinking about what dress to wear, whether she should try a new hairstyle, whether Xander knew how to dance. She also found herself having longer conversations with him, usually in the evenings after supper when her father would doze in his chair, and she and Xander would sit on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. They talked about everything and nothing, his travels, her dreams of maybe seeing the ocean someday, their favorite books, the challenges of ranching in such an unforgiving climate. "You ever think about settling down?" she asked him one night. "Finding a place to call home permanently?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think about it," he admitted, "more lately than before." "What changed?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I suppose I found something worth staying for." Her heart began to pound. "Xander, I know it has only been a short time," he said quickly. "And I know you have been through something difficult. I am not trying to push or presume anything. I just want you to know that I see you, Wilhelmina, not as someone to be pitied or as a job or an obligation. I see you as a smart, capable, beautiful woman, and I feel lucky every day that I get to know you better." She could not speak for a moment, emotion clogging her throat. Everything Marcus had never made her feel, Xander inspired without even trying. "I see you too," she whispered. "And I am glad you are here." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together under the endless canopy of stars. The night of the social arrived warm and clear. Wilhelmina wore her best dress, a deep green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She had spent extra time on her hair, pinning it up in a style her mother had taught her years ago. When she came downstairs, both her father and Xander stared. "You look beautiful, daughter," Thomas said gruffly. "Stunning," Xander agreed, and the look in his eyes made her blush. They rode into town together, arriving at the community hall just as the music was starting. Lanterns had been strung up outside, casting a warm glow, and through the open doors Wilhelmina could see people already dancing. Her stomach churned with nervousness, but Xander offered his arm and she took it, drawing strength from his steady presence. As soon as they entered, she felt the weight of attention shift to them. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. She lifted her chin and smiled, refusing to show her discomfort. "Wilhelmina," called Sarah Chen, one of her few close friends. Sarah hurried over, her husband following behind. "You look wonderful. And who is this?" "Sarah, this is Xander Frost," Wilhelmina said. "He has been working at our ranch." "Xander, this is Sarah and Thomas Chen. They run the general store in town." Handshakes and pleasantries were exchanged, and Wilhelmina relaxed slightly. Maybe this would not be as bad as she feared. But then she saw him. Marcus Downey, standing near the refreshment table, alive and well and apparently back in town. He was with a woman Wilhelmina did not recognize, a petite brunette in an expensive-looking dress. They were standing close together, his hand on the small of her back in a possessive gesture that made Wilhelmina's blood run cold. "That son of a—" Her father started, but Wilhelmina squeezed his arm. "Papa, please, not here." Xander had followed her gaze and his jaw tightened. "Is that him?" "Yes," she said quietly. Marcus looked up at that moment and their eyes met across the room. To her shock, he smiled slightly and began walking toward them. The brunette followed, looking curious. "Wilhelmina," Marcus said when he reached them, his tone casual as if they were old acquaintances meeting by chance. "Good to see you." She stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Good to see you. After what he had done, Marcus," she finally managed, her voice ice. "I wish I could say the same." He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Listen, I know things ended badly between us, badly," her father interrupted. "You left my daughter at the altar without a word of explanation. You humiliated her in front of the entire town." "I know," Marcus said, holding up his hands. "And I am sorry about that, truly. But it would not have been right to go through with it when my heart was elsewhere." He glanced at the brunette. "This is Catherine. We met in Santa Fe last spring. I tried to forget about her, tried to do the right thing and honor my commitment to Wilhelmina, but when I saw you standing there at the altar, I realized I could not marry you while being in love with someone else. It would have been unfair to everyone." Wilhelmina felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger at his cowardice and how he had handled it, relief that he had not married her while loving another woman, and underneath it all, a growing sense of gratitude that she had been spared a loveless marriage. "You should have told me," she said. "Before the wedding, you owed me that much." "You are right," Marcus admitted. "I was a coward. I am sorry, Wilhelmina. You deserve better than what I did to you." She looked at him, this man she had almost married, and realized she felt nothing for him now. No love, no anger, just a kind of distant indifference. "Yes," she said, "I do deserve better, and I found it." She turned to Xander, who had been standing silently beside her, and saw surprise and hope flicker across his face. She took his hand deliberately, a public claim, and felt him squeeze back. Marcus looked between them and nodded. "Then I am glad something good came of it. I wish you happiness, Wilhelmina. Truly." He and Catherine moved away, and Wilhelmina let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her father looked ready to commit violence, but Xander spoke first. "That took courage," he said quietly to Wilhelmina, facing him like that. "I had help," she replied, meeting his eyes, "from someone who makes me feel brave." The music swelled and Xander smiled. "May I have this dance?" She nodded, and he led her onto the floor. She was vaguely aware of people watching, whispering, but she did not care. Xander's hand was warm at her waist, his other hand holding hers gently, and they moved together with surprising ease. He was a better dancer than she had expected, leading her through the steps with confidence. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked. "My mother insisted," he said with a grin. "Said a gentleman should know how to properly escort a lady on the dance floor." I grumbled about it at the time, but I suppose she was right. They danced 3 songs in a row, and by the end, Wilhelmina was breathless and laughing. Other couples had joined them on the floor, and the initial awkwardness of her arrival had dissipated. Sarah caught her eye and gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up, which made Wilhelmina laugh harder. Throughout the evening, several people approached to say hello, to welcome Xander to the community, to make small talk that carefully avoided mentioning the failed wedding. Wilhelmina realized that while there would always be gossips, most people were fundamentally kind and wanted her to be happy. The weight she had been carrying since that awful day in June began to lift. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Xander helped her into the wagon and climbed up beside her. Her father had opted to ride his horse, giving them a measure of privacy. "Thank you," Wilhelmina said as they started the journey home. "For tonight, for being there." "I did not do anything," Xander replied. "You did," she insisted. "You gave me the courage to face everyone. You showed me that what Marcus did does not define me." She paused, gathering her courage. "You showed me what it feels like to be truly cared for." He pulled the wagon to a stop, right there in the middle of the road under the star-filled sky. "Wilhelmina," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been moving from place to place for years, never finding anywhere that felt like home. But these past 2 months with you have felt more like home than anywhere I have ever been. I think I am falling in love with you." Her heart soared. "I know I am falling in love with you," she replied. "I think I started that very first day when you defended me at the church." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, and Wilhelmina felt like she was finally where she belonged. This was what had been missing with Marcus, this electricity, this sense of rightness, this feeling that her soul recognized his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "Do this right. I know it has not been long since the wedding situation, and I do not want people to think—" "I do not care what people think anymore," Wilhelmina interrupted. "But yes, I would like that. A proper courtship." They kissed again, and it was her father's discreet cough that finally separated them. He had ridden back when he noticed they had stopped. "Everything all right?" Thomas asked, but there was amusement in his voice. "Yes, sir," Xander said, picking up the reins again. "Everything is perfect." Over the next months, their relationship deepened and blossomed. Xander continued working the ranch, proving himself invaluable not just as a laborer, but as a partner in planning and decision-making. He suggested breeding programs, better grazing rotation, and efficiency improvements that increased their yield. Thomas came to rely on his judgment, and openly said he hoped Xander would stay permanently. Wilhelmina and Xander spent every spare moment together. He taught her to rope better, to read the signs of incoming weather, to gentle horses with patience rather than force. She taught him her mother's recipes, shared her favorite spots on the ranch, read to him from her small collection of books in the evenings. They talked about everything: their hopes for the future, their fears, their past disappointments and dreams. Xander told her about losing his family's ranch, about the guilt he still carried that he had not been able to save it. Wilhelmina told him about losing her mother, about the loneliness of being the only child left after her brother died, about her fear that she would never find real love. "You found it," Xander assured her. "We found each other." In October, as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides and the air took on a crisp edge, Xander asked Thomas for permission to marry Wilhelmina. Her father gave his enthusiastic blessing, saying he could not imagine a better son-in-law. Xander proposed on horseback during a ride to check the upper pastures. He helped her dismount near a small creek, pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, and dropped to one knee in the grass. "Wilhelmina Tucker," he said, "you are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting, to put down roots and grow old watching sunsets from a porch swing. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she said yes, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They decided to marry in November, a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Wilhelmina wanted no fuss, no big production. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that she bought from Sarah's store, and Xander wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed for the occasion. The ceremony took place not in the church where she had been jilted, but outdoors on their ranch, under a brilliant blue sky. The same reverend officiated, and this time when he asked if anyone objected, there was only happy silence. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed her deeply while their small gathering cheered. The reception was held in the barn, which they had cleaned and decorated with lanterns and autumn leaves. Someone had a fiddle, someone else had a guitar, and there was dancing and laughter and genuine joy. Even Marcus and Catherine attended, offering congratulations that seemed sincere. Wilhelmina found she could accept their good wishes without any lingering bitterness. As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Wilhelmina found herself alone with Xander for a moment behind the barn. He pulled her close, and she melted into his embrace. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied. "When Marcus walked away, I thought my life was ending, but it was actually beginning." "I will never walk away," Xander promised. "I will be by your side for every sunrise and sunset, every joy and challenge for the rest of our lives." "I know," she said, and she did know with absolute certainty. This was the man she was meant to find, the love she was meant to have. They spent their wedding night in the house, which her father had tactfully vacated to stay with friends in town for a few days. In the privacy of her bedroom, which was now their bedroom, Xander made love to her with tenderness and passion, and Wilhelmina discovered pleasures she had never imagined. They fit together as perfectly as two people could, and afterward, lying tangled in the sheets with moonlight streaming through the window, she felt a contentment so profound it was almost overwhelming. "I love you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I love you more than words can say," he replied, kissing her hair. The early days of their marriage were blissful but not without adjustments. Xander moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse into the main house, and they learned to navigate sharing space, merging routines, becoming a unit rather than two individuals. There were small disagreements about household decisions, about ranch management, about whether to invest in more cattle or focus on improving their existing herd. But they worked through everything with communication and compromise, and Wilhelmina found that the process of building a life together was itself a kind of joy. She loved waking up beside Xander, loved cooking meals they would share, loved the easy intimacy of discussing their days while doing evening chores side by side. In January, as snow blanketed the ranch and they spent long evenings by the fire, Wilhelmina realized she had missed her monthly cycle. At first she attributed it to the cold weather or changes in her routine, but when she missed a second time and began feeling nauseous in the mornings, she knew. She was carrying Xander's child. She told him one evening as they sat together on the couch, his arm around her shoulders. "I have news," she said, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. "What kind of news?" he asked, turning to look at her. "The best kind," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents." His eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed frozen. Then a huge smile broke across his face and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. "Truly?" he asked, pulling back to search her face. "We are having a baby." "Yes," she confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "Probably in late August or early September." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and she felt his joy matching her own. When they finally separated, he kept his hand on her stomach, as if he could already feel the tiny life growing there. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be a family." "We already are a family," Wilhelmina corrected gently. "But yes, we are expanding." They told Thomas the next day, and he was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He immediately began planning improvements to the ranch house, insisting they needed to add another bedroom, improve the kitchen, make everything more comfortable for the coming baby. The pregnancy was not easy. Wilhelmina suffered from severe nausea for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Xander was endlessly patient, holding her hair when she was sick, preparing bland foods she could tolerate, taking over many of her usual chores without complaint. As her belly grew and her energy returned, she felt more herself, but there were new challenges. Swollen ankles, back pain, difficulty sleeping through it all, Xander was her rock. He rubbed her feet every evening, built cushions to support her back, held her when the fear of childbirth kept her awake at night. He read books about pregnancy and infant care that he borrowed from Sarah, determined to be prepared. What if something goes wrong? Wilhelmina asked him one night in July when the baby's arrival felt suddenly imminent and terrifying. "What if I cannot do this?" "You can," Xander said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, and I will be right there with you every moment. Whatever happens, we face it together." In early September, on a hot afternoon when the cicadas were loud in the cottonwood trees, Wilhelmina's labor began. The midwife arrived, a capable woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who had delivered half the babies in Cimarron County. Thomas paced anxiously outside while Xander stayed by Wilhelmina's side, holding her hand and offering encouragement as the contractions intensified. The labor was long and difficult, stretching from afternoon into evening and then into the darkest hours of the night. Wilhelmina was exhausted, drenched in sweat, certain she could not endure another minute. But Xander never left, never stopped telling her she could do this, that she was amazing, that he loved her. Finally, as dawn light began to filter through the windows, their child entered the world with a loud, healthy cry. "It is a boy," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, placing the wriggling, red-faced infant on Wilhelmina's chest. She looked down at her son, this perfect little person she and Xander had created, and felt such overwhelming love that she began to cry. Xander leaned over them both, his own eyes wet, and kissed first the baby's head and then Wilhelmina's forehead. "You did it," he whispered. "You are incredible." "We did it," she corrected. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's scrunched-up face, Xander said, "What about William? After your mother Wilhelmina, we could call him Will." "William Thomas Frost," Wilhelmina said, testing it out. "I love it." Thomas was allowed in to meet his grandson, and the tough old rancher immediately dissolved into tears. "He is beautiful," he said, holding the baby with surprising gentleness. "Absolutely beautiful." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, of learning how to care for an infant, of marveling at every tiny change as Will grew and developed. Xander was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Will when he fussed, singing soft lullabies in Spanish that he remembered from his own childhood. Wilhelmina watched her husband with their son and felt her love deepen even further. This was the life she had been meant to have, the family she had been meant to build. Every moment of heartbreak and loneliness before Xander had been worth it because it had led her to him. As Will grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch prospered. The breeding program Xander had implemented was paying off, and they were able to expand their herd. Thomas gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, content to let Xander take the lead while he enjoyed his grandson. The old man spent hours carving toys for Will, teaching him to identify birds and plants, passing on his knowledge and love of the land. When Will was 3, Wilhelmina became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1886, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Rose after Wilhelmina's mother. She was a calm, easy baby, so different from her energetic brother, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from day one. "I have a daughter," Xander would say, wonder in his voice, holding Rose while she slept against his chest. "I cannot believe I have a daughter." Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, challenges and joys. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle, good years when the rains came and the grass grew lush. There were scary moments when Will fell from a tree and broke his arm, when Rose developed a fever that lasted 3 frightening days, when Thomas had a spell with his heart that reminded them all of his mortality. But there were also beautiful moments. Christmas mornings with the children squealing over simple gifts, summer picnics by the creek, autumn evenings watching sunsets from the porch while the children played in the yard, winter nights gathered around the fire reading stories. Xander and Wilhelmina grew together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had disagreements and frustrations, as all couples do, but they always worked through them. The foundation of respect and genuine affection they had built from the beginning remained solid. Sometimes, Wilhelmina would think back to that day at the church, to Marcus walking away without a word. She would remember the humiliation and heartbreak, the sense that her life was ending. And then she would look at Xander, at the life they had built, at their children, and she would feel only gratitude. Marcus had done her the greatest favor of her life by walking away. He had freed her to find real love, the kind that sustained and nourished, the kind that grew stronger with time rather than fading. She learned through the years that Marcus and Catherine had moved to Santa Fe, where they ran a successful mercantile. They had children of their own, and on the rare occasions when their paths crossed, the meetings were cordial. There was no bitterness on either side, just acknowledgement that things had worked out as they should. On a cool October evening in 1892, Wilhelmina stood on the porch of their ranch house, now expanded and improved over the years, and watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Will, now 7, was teaching 5-year-old Rose to rope a fence post, both of them laughing when the rope inevitably missed. Thomas sat in his rocking chair, older and more weathered but still sharp-eyed and engaged. And Xander walked toward the house from the barn, his hat in his hand, his face lighting up when he saw her. She remembered another afternoon, years ago, when he had taken off his hat at the church and spoken words of kindness to a stranger in distress. She remembered thinking later that there had been a moment when he could have walked away like Marcus had, could have decided that her situation was too complicated, her baggage too heavy. But instead, he had said those simple words, "I will not." He had not walked away. He had stayed, had fought for her, had built a life with her. And that choice, that moment of commitment from a cowboy who barely knew her, had changed everything. Xander reached the porch and climbed the steps, immediately coming to stand beside her. He slipped his arm around her waist and she leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side as she always had. "Beautiful evening," he observed. "The most beautiful," she agreed. "You know what I was thinking about today?" he asked. "What?" "That day I rode into Cimarron. I had no intention of staying, was just passing through. If I had arrived an hour later or an hour earlier, I would have missed the whole thing at the church, would have watered my horse and moved on, never met you." "But you did not," Wilhelmina said, turning to look up at him. "You arrived exactly when you were meant to. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to." "Meant to be," Xander agreed. He kissed her temple. "I love you, Wilhelmina Frost." "I love you too," she replied. "Always have, always will." They stood together as the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars began to appear. Behind them, their children's laughter rang out. Thomas's rocking chair creaked rhythmically. The cattle lowed in the distance. Every sound, every sight, every sensation spoke of home, of family, of love earned and nurtured and cherished. This was their life, built on the foundation of one man's courage to stay when another had walked away, on one woman's resilience in the face of heartbreak, on the choice they both made every day to honor the love they had found in each other. Years continued to pass, each one adding layers to their story. Will grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father and grandfather did. Rose developed a talent for drawing, filling pages with sketches of the animals and landscapes around her. Thomas lived to see both his grandchildren grow into young people, passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 in the winter of 1897. His death was peaceful but deeply felt. Wilhelmina grieved the loss of her father, the man who had stood by her through everything, who had welcomed Xander without reservation, who had loved her unconditionally. But she also found comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happy, to know his legacy would continue through his grandchildren. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree he had planted himself decades earlier. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect Thomas Tucker had earned over his years in New Mexico. After his death, the ranch became fully Xander and Wilhelmina's. They continued to improve and expand it, adding more acreage, improving their stock, building a reputation for quality cattle that spread throughout the territory. Will, as he grew older, became increasingly involved in the operations, showing a natural aptitude for ranching that filled Xander with pride. Rose, at 16, announced she wanted to become a teacher. Wilhelmina supported this wholeheartedly, recognizing her daughter's gentle intelligence and patience. They made arrangements for Rose to attend the new normal school that had opened in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And though it was hard to send her away, they were proud of her ambition. Will met a girl named Emily Patterson at a church social when he was 19, and they courted for a year before announcing their engagement. Emily was a sweet, practical young woman from a neighboring ranch, and Wilhelmina could see genuine love between them. Their wedding in 1901 was a joyous occasion, and when they built a small house on the edge of the ranch property, Wilhelmina and Xander were thrilled to have them close. Rose returned from school in 1903 with her teaching certificate and took a position at the Cimarron schoolhouse. She boarded with Sarah Chen, who was now widowed and happy for the company. Rose loved teaching, throwing herself into her work with passion and dedication. In 1905, when Wilhelmina was 48 and Xander 51, they became grandparents for the first time. Will and Emily welcomed a son they named Thomas, after his great-grandfather. Holding her tiny grandson, Wilhelmina marveled at the continuity of life, at how the story kept unfolding in unexpected and beautiful ways. "We are getting old," Xander teased her one evening as they watched little Thomas sleep. "Speak for yourself," Wilhelmina retorted, but she knew what he meant. They were both showing their age now. Xander's dark hair was liberally streaked with silver, and Wilhelmina's face bore lines that spoke of decades spent squinting into the bright New Mexico sun. But they were healthy and active, still working the ranch together, still deeply in love. Rose married a young lawyer named David Harrison in 1907, surprising everyone, including herself. She had seemed content with her teaching career and independent life, but David was persistent and patient, and eventually Rose recognized what Wilhelmina had seen from the start, that David adored her and would support her ambitions rather than trying to limit them. They settled in Cimarron, where David opened a practice and Rose continued teaching until their first child arrived in 1908, a daughter named Wilhelmina after her grandmother. By 1910, as New Mexico moved toward statehood, Xander and Wilhelmina had 4 grandchildren, with another on the way. The ranch that Thomas Tucker had carved out of raw land decades earlier was now thriving, a legacy that would continue for generations. Will had proven himself more than capable of managing the day-to-day operations, allowing Xander to step back slightly, though he still worked alongside his son every day. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Xander surprised Wilhelmina with a trip to Santa Fe. They left the ranch in Will's capable hands and spent a week in the territorial capital, staying in a real hotel, eating in restaurants, attending the opera. It was the first real vacation they had taken since their wedding, and Wilhelmina treasured every moment. One evening, as they sat in the hotel dining room, Xander reached across the table and took her hand. 25 years, he said. Where did the time go? Into a life well lived, Wilhelmina replied. Into a family well loved. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Any of it? She knew what he meant. Their unconventional beginning, the speed with which they had fallen in love, the challenges they had faced. Not for a single moment, she said firmly. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Xander Frost. You and our children and grandchildren, this life we have built together. I would not change a single day. His eyes, still that same warm brown that had captivated her from the beginning, filled with emotion. You saved me, he said quietly. I was drifting, rootless, going nowhere. You gave me purpose, home, love. You made me into the man I always wanted to be. We saved each other, Wilhelmina corrected. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. They returned to the ranch refreshed and renewed, ready for whatever the future held. New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, and they celebrated along with everyone else, proud to be part of this new era. The automobile began to make appearances in Cimarron, though Xander declared he would stick with horses as long as he was able. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant. The mountains, the land, the bonds of family, the power of love. In 1915, Wilhelmina turned 58 and Xander 61. They were officially old now, though neither felt it. Xander still rode out every morning to check the cattle, still fixed fences and gentled horses. Wilhelmina still managed the household, now expanded to include helping Emily with the growing number of grandchildren, who seemed to appear with delightful regularity. They had 7 grandchildren now, ranging in age from 10-year-old Thomas to brand-new baby Elizabeth. The ranch house, which they had expanded multiple times over the years, rang with childish laughter whenever the families gathered for Sunday dinners. Wilhelmina loved watching Xander with the grandchildren, teaching them to rope, telling them stories, slipping them candy when their parents were not looking. You are spoiling them, she would scold gently. That is what grandparents are for, he would reply with a grin. As the years advanced, they made plans for the eventual transition of the ranch to Will. Legal documents were drawn up, ensuring everything would be handled smoothly when the time came. But neither of them was in any hurry to stop working. The ranch was not just their livelihood. It was their identity, their purpose, their life's work. In the spring of 1920, Cimarron organized a celebration for couples who had been married 25 years or more. Xander and Wilhelmina, now approaching their 35th anniversary, were honored along with a handful of other long-married couples. Standing in the community hall where they had danced at that social so long ago, Wilhelmina thought about all the lives that had been lived, all the stories that had unfolded since that night. Marcus Downey had died 2 years earlier in Santa Fe, leaving Catherine a wealthy widow. She had sent a note to Wilhelmina when it happened, a kind remembrance of old connections. Wilhelmina had written back with condolences, meaning them sincerely. Whatever pain Marcus had caused her had been erased by decades of happiness with Xander. Sarah Chen, now in her 70s, approached them at the celebration. You too, she said, shaking her head with affection, still looking at each other like newlyweds. That is because we remember that we could have missed each other entirely, Xander said, pulling Wilhelmina close. We never take it for granted. That is the secret, Sarah agreed. My Thomas and I had 40 good years before he passed. I would not trade a single day, even knowing how it ended. As the evening wound down and they prepared to head home, Wilhelmina paused on the steps of the community hall, looking out at the town she had known her entire life. So much had changed, yet so much remained the same. The mountains still rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging. The stars still filled the sky with impossible brightness, and beside her stood the man who had chosen to stay when he could have ridden on, the man who had built a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked, following her gaze. "About how lucky we are," she replied. "About how one day changed everything, the day you took off your hat and spoke kindly to a stranger. The day I met the woman I was going to love for the rest of my life," Xander corrected. "Best day I ever had." They went home to their ranch, to the land they had nurtured and improved, to the house that had sheltered their family, to the bed they had shared for 35 years. In the darkness, Xander pulled her close, and she nestled against him with the ease of long practice. Their bodies fit together perfectly as they always had, as they always would. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more," he replied, the old game they had played for decades. "Impossible," she said, smiling against his shoulder. "I will prove it to you tomorrow," he promised. "And every day after," she finished. The years continued their steady march. Will and Emily had 8 children eventually, keeping the ranch house lively. Rose and David had 4, all of them growing up with strong values and good educations. The grandchildren began to have children of their own, making Xander and Wilhelmina great-grandparents, a development that amused them both. "We are ancient," Xander joked on his 70th birthday in 1924. "You are ancient," Wilhelmina teased back. "I am merely mature." But they were slowing down. There was no denying it. Xander's joints ached in the morning, especially in cold weather. Wilhelmina moved more carefully, her back often stiff. They passed more of the ranch work to Will and his sons, though both still insisted on doing their share. In the summer of 1926, they celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary with a big family gathering. All their children and grandchildren came, along with great-grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. The ranch was filled with life and laughter, with good food and music, with the warmth of community and family. Someone brought out an old fiddle and people began to dance. Xander bowed formally to Wilhelmina. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Frost?" "You may, Mr. Frost," she replied with equal formality. They danced as they had at that social so many decades ago, their steps perhaps slower now but still in perfect synchronization. Wilhelmina looked up at her husband's face, lined and weathered but still handsome to her, still beloved, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. Around them, their family danced and celebrated. Their legacy, built not just in land and cattle but in love and values and the bonds of family. This was what mattered, she thought. This was what lasted. When the song ended, they stood together in the center of the yard, surrounded by the people they loved most. Will raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Two of the finest people I have ever known. Thank you for showing us what love looks like, what commitment means, what family is all about." "To Xander and Wilhelmina," the crowd echoed, glasses raised. Xander squeezed her hand and she squeezed back, their private language unchanged by time. They had built something extraordinary together, she realized. Not just a successful ranch, not just a large family, but a foundation of love that would ripple forward through generations. That night, lying in bed with moonlight streaming through the window just as it had on their wedding night, Wilhelmina thought about the journey that had brought them here. about Marcus walking away from the altar, about the shame and heartbreak she had felt, about a stranger named Xander Frost who had taken off his hat and said kindly words when she needed them most. She thought about his proposal at her father's ranch, about his patient courtship, about the way he had loved her through every challenge and joy. She thought about their children growing up, about becoming grandparents and then great-grandparents, about the life they had built together on this land they both loved. "Thank you," she whispered to Xander, who she thought was asleep. "For what?" he murmured, proving he was awake. "For everything," she said. "For staying when you could have gone, for loving me, for building this life with me." He rolled to face her, and even in the dim light she could see the depth of emotion in his eyes. "Wilhelmina, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every day with you has been a gift. I would do it all again, exactly the same way, just to end up here with you." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 41 years of love and partnership and devotion. When they broke apart, she settled back against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life. This was their story, and it was beautiful beyond measure. The groom had taken one look and walked away, setting in motion events that had led to this moment. The cowboy had taken off his hat and said he would not abandon her, would not ignore her pain, would not be like other men who only thought of themselves. And from those two moments, from rejection and kindness, from heartbreak and hope, had grown a love story for the ages. As Wilhelmina drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had chosen her, who had stayed with her, who had loved her with everything he had for more than 4 decades, she smiled. Life had taught her that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, that closed doors open better ones, that patience and faith and courage are rewarded in ways we cannot imagine. The Wild West was taming now, becoming something different, something more settled and civilized. But the lessons of those early days remained. The importance of integrity, the value of hard work, the power of choosing love over fear, of commitment over convenience. Xander and Wilhelmina Frost had lived those lessons every day of their marriage. They had built not just a ranch but a legacy, not just a family but a foundation that would endure. Their story would be told by their descendants, passed down through generations, a reminder that true love exists and that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected beginnings. In the morning, they would wake and begin another day, working the land they loved, surrounded by family, grateful for each moment. They would continue this pattern for as long as they were able, squeezing every drop of joy from the life they had built together. But for now they slept peacefully. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built something extraordinary from a chance meeting and a choice to stay. The cowboy who had taken off his hat and said, "I will not walk away." The woman who had been brave enough to love again after heartbreak. Together, they had created a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, a life worth living. And they lived it fully, right up until their final days, never taking a single moment for granted, always grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together on that dusty day in Cimarron, New Mexico, when one man walked away and another chose to stay.